The concept of hell, as we understand it today, does not have biblical origins. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. And if you look throughout a translation like the King James Version, the word hell occurs across the Old and New Testaments. But it is a rendering of multiple different words. In the Old Testament, it's always the same Hebrew word, Sheol. And the word Sheol does not refer to the conceptual package that we understand today as hell. It actually just refers to the abode of all the dead, because they had an entirely different conceptual package about the afterlife back then. In ancient Israel and Judah, everybody went to the same place, righteous, wicked, or somewhere in between. And they didn't have a real clear idea of what that place was going to be like, but what is pretty consistent is that nobody looked forward to it. It seemed to have been understood as a kind of dreary existence that also ran a bunch of risks associated with entities that might be occupying the underworld, the Yadaim, the Rephaim, maybe even the Nephilim. But based on burial goods, it seems that the living anticipated that the deceased needed access to light and to food and to water. And based on what we can reconstruct about ancestor worship from those material remains, it also seems that the deceased had things to offer the living, and particularly access to strategic information, blessings, curses, things like that. But again, what is consistent is that nobody looked forward to the afterlife. It was a dreary, dull existence. And this doesn't really begin to change until oppression and persecution begins to force Judahites to wonder where God's justice is going to be realized. Because Judahites and later Judeans and Jewish folks were experiencing an awful lot of oppression at the hands of larger empires like Assyria, like Babylon, Persia, and then the Hellenistic empires. And in all of this, they're seeing a lot of their own people, whom they consider righteous, suffering and dying without seeing God's justice. And they're also seeing an awful lot of wicked people who are responsible for the oppression and the persecution and the suffering, not experiencing God's judgment. So this results in the wisdom literature that is contemplating the problem of evil and where God's justice is. And so we see this in Ecclesiastes, we see this in Job, we see this sometimes in the Psalms. And it's also getting explored by Greco-Roman period Jewish authors who are writing texts that would not end up in the Bible, like the text of 1st Enoch, where they begin to develop ideas about post-mortem divine punishment and post-mortem divine reward. Maybe it is after death that God's justice is being realized. And so initially, they were coming up with ideas about these wicked angels based on Genesis 6 that introduced evil into the world. And they're the group that is experiencing the tip of the sword of God's post-mortem divine punishment. But there are also humans that are getting punished as well. And we have one part of the book of Enoch that talks about these smooth places where people are gathered to wait for judgment. And depending on your comportment in life, you would go to one of these different places. And there's